This is a show for grown-ups.
And they say bad words.
And they say bad words.
Say final warning.
Final warning.
Hello and welcome to the Pot of Blunders. I'm your host, Nate Magnuski, and with me today is Wythe Marschall. Wythe, how the hell are you?
Good. Thanks for having me, Nate.
Oh, not a problem. So you wrote Stillfleet, the RPG, correct?
Yeah, I've been the writer and game designer of this sci-fi RPG called Stillfleet for a while, and I'm bringing it to life with some friends, and they are now more involved in the design process. And also, we started a Patreon to kind of help us get going. We all have day jobs, and this is a project of love, But that meant, that now we have some really great patrons who also have contributed some text. So it's become a little less, just my authorial voice. It's more kind of editing and bringing together ideas that build on, a system I developed over many years with friends, just as a GM, somebody liked playing games and thought I had some ideas that might be fun to try out.
So how hard was it to give up that kind of narrative control and that the system control? Was it easy for you to accept the help, or was it like, this is my baby?
It's funny. There's so much stuff with RPGs because in a way you're trying to model, right, like all of physics and all of biology, and you're thinking about future cultures, or in a fantasy setting, alternative societies and cultures. And it's really just a lot to tackle. So I've actually always found it fun to bounce ideas off friends and collaborate. And I think some of the core ideas I had early on with Stillfleet, in that eureka moment of like, no, wait, I've got a better system than, we were playing a lot of essentially OSRD 20 games, Apocalypse Engine games, which are all great. I know those systems I think work fine, but I really liked some of the core insights I came up with our system, which uses, scores become actual different die types. And everything else is just one basically pool called grit. So all your powers cost grit. That goes up and down, and you're just rolling different die against each other. And that is actually very simple. And we figured out the math pretty quickly of how to get a range that feels, epic without being unmanageable and you're adding a lot. And, that has held pretty true, but a lot of the other nuances, a lot of specific powers, for example, someone will say, hey, this is way overpowered. I think it should cost more. And it's like, great, let's change that. I think that stuff is fun. I'm not the greatest, designer in that sense. Mechanically, I don't think I like always nail the cost of a power. And it's really easy for me to make that change. The other thing is just world building. I mean, so we were lucky enough, we're friends with a guy who has been, making a podcast with his friends that's narrative, real play, called Fun City. He's a good friend, and he's been playing the game for years, helped playtest it. And he had asked, well, can we play your game on our show? And I was like, yeah, of course. I mean, that's amazing. But, he's also in the course that he and his co-GM, they kind of have an interesting setup where they have sort of two people running the show. One is more the plot and one is more like NPCs. But they've added a lot just through like, hey, on this planet, how does this species like live? And I'm like, I don't know. I've never thought of it. It's a one-off, mention in the rule book. And for them to say like, yeah, well, we wrote this little paragraph. Do you mind if that now is canon? It's like, yeah, of course. I mean, I think that again is like, it's really makes it more fun. And it's actually kind of makes it easier for the most part, for me.
It's beautiful. The fact that you're able to see the value of that collaboration just beyond, having a playtester check out things and make sure the balance is right. That speaks, I think, for me anyway, very highly of your design mindset. Like you're trying to make the best game possible. You have a sense of ownership, but it's not something that's going to overwrite a good idea from somebody else.
Yeah, and I think thanks. And I think for probably many designers have this feeling of like, you want your game to be extensible. I think it's rare. It's hard to imagine in a way someone designing a game where it has to be played a certain way, because then it's more like a board game. Right. If you're designing a tabletop RPG, you're designing a whole world. And so it's pretty easy to imagine, and that physics engine, and you can drop the physics engine into a different world, or you can use the world, but bring in different engine to run it. So I think that's true all the way back when I first started playing D&D, but made it wackier in some way, right? Or, whatever sort of tinkering a lot of GMs do. So I think similarly, I've wanted from the beginning this to be an extensible system that I've now played a lot of games in a fantasy setting using the same rules, right? And in kind of witchy, like the year 1666, you were basically fighting colonization, and that the rules work there too, and I've used actually the same powers, just renamed them. In some specific cases, they don't make as much sense. Okay, if it's a power about advanced electromagnetic technologies that don't exist, well, that doesn't really apply. But a lot of the other powers still make total sense. And so I think that to me was another goal from the beginning. And it's been great to see, even within the sort of main sci-fi setting, like my artist friend, who's another sort of co-designer at this point, like in his game, I think he runs it at a slightly higher tech level. Like for me, it's this very post-apical, setting. So everything's kind of messed up and back to kind of an early modern life, except you're in a space station. But in his game, it's a little more 1980s, like there's computers, but they're just kind of crappy. And I think, the truth might be, somewhere in between, or it doesn't really matter. Like it doesn't affect the rules as much. And it's fun to see other GMs just kind of take the setting and naturally be like, yeah, I get it. And then they do sort of their own thing. And I think that's fun. I mean, that's a kind of compliment because it's like, okay, well, it works for this person who thinks differently about, storytelling and game design and sort of science fiction.
What else do you need from a game? That's great. So before we go further into the mechanics of it, because I do want to come back to that,
sure.
Let's just talk about the base setting itself. Tell me about Stillfleet.
It started in a way as a joke. It's like, how do you have a setting that's about climate disruption and capitalism, but not about any specific present issue? It's modeling that or mirroring that, but in another world. But I still wanted this sci-fi feeling. So it's not, a fantasy world that is our world, but shifted over in some dimension. It's Earth people, but it's 100 million years in the future. So Earth has been problematically sort of destroyed and rebuilt. Humans have come and gone. Presumably some cohort of humans, made it to the stars, and who knows what happened. Some of them have evolved in some way. Some have come back. In 100 million years in the future, Earth is back to kind of, there's humans, and there's lots of sort of mutants and other sapient beings, thinking beings. And some of them 300 years ago in the setting of the game discovered these portals seemingly built by angel-like bee people from the future, some sort of advanced species that's just a MacGuffin from classic sci-fi, like the species that made it, that made it sort of advanced consciousness in some way that wants to help poor humans. So they're kind of there. They've seeded these kind of portals that this group of essentially early modern explorers named Stiffworks, and they use it to get to this alien space station that is just incredibly bizarre. So in present of the game, so 300 years after that, there's this company that's been operating from this giant alien space station that they can use a lot of parts. They can use these portals to get from planet to planet. They always sort of they always open to habitable Goldilocks worlds or to like vast ships by advanced species that have, atmosphere or could have atmosphere. It seems like it's primed to send humans places and help humans out. And they've learned a little about the station, but they're not sure, essentially what it can do. And they still have essentially this early capitalistic like society. And so, it's a game about this kind of evil Kafkan company that hires you, you're an adventurer, quote unquote, in the sense that, that's your job, right? You're born into a space station where once you come of age, either you're working on the algae farms or you get sent out to find architect, to find pieces of the past that might be valuable to the archivists, this sort of monk-like order that are trying to restore, trying to understand, why humans keep making all this cool stuff and then seemingly going extinct. And, you basically find that the stars are littered with advanced species and technologies, but a lot of them are destroyed in some way. So there's this sort of assumption in the game of what is called in speculative fiction in physics, the dark forest hypothesis. Cixin Liu has a great book of that title that explores, well, what if there were aliens and all they're doing is they have sort of alarms, and anytime any sapient species pokes its head up enough technologically, it just gets blown off because it's a threat. I think the game sort of assumes that the world is very cruel, but at the same time, you as an individual are not cruel. So you can be a hero, but yes, you're in a sort of grim, dark setting, and you're also within a universe that is extremely dangerous. So it puts the heroes automatically into this role of like, well, do you want to do what the company wants? Because the company is not great. And also, what is your end goal? And for me, it's just been really fun to see how people take that. So some people really fight the man, they're against the company. Some people really go with whatever the company says. So, you as the GM kind of assign them these missions and see sort of where their moral compass lies, and also just see what direction, how much do they want to rebuild the technical glories of the past versus kind of live as kings on some province with a medieval tech level and they have sort of modern guns. It's like playing out sort of dark fantasies that I think we all have seen and inhaled in a way through all kinds of fiction, fantasy, science fiction, and historical fiction. And I think being able to metabolize in the form of a game with your friends lets you have those hard moments and you can call each other out. You can kind of explore the setting as this toolbox for having discussions about like, well, what would the future really be like, or what it should be like? And it allows you to do so, I think, in a kind of safe way and a fun way. And I think it just makes for a good setting. There's other sci-fi games that are super far future. I mean, Numenera, I think, is set 9 billion years in the future, which is, sorry to quibble with Monty Cook, but it's not how that works, like how the sun would be. It's that fun, in some ways, the old school revival impulse of like, yeah, I wanted Earth, but with dinosaurs, and you have a sword, but you also have a spacesuit, and how to kind of create that feeling of like there's a purpose as to why the PCs are together, but without shoehorning it too much. Where like you have to do like I love Grant Howitt's Spire, which is a similar game that came out while I was writing Stillfleet, and I was like, oh, this is kind of the same thing but with Drow. Which is a game where you play as like Drow fighting the man. In this case, these high elves who've taken over this Drow city. It's a cool idea, but it's to me, it was the only thing I would quibble with in that sense of like the world is it feels a little narrow where you're always kind of doing that spy story, which I love, and I make my players do a lot. But I love the idea in Stillfleet of what if you're just delivering like a sack of coffee essentially from one planet to another, right? And like stuff goes wrong, you get jumped, it's actually a bomb. I mean, you can imagine a million scenarios there. I like sometimes making it a little more like D&D or a little more like a Kafka story where it's just kind of, your tax form is wrong. And you can be amazed how much that can get into like the weeds of different social powers. A lot of the game's powers, just because the mechanics are about social things. So they're not all sort of combat oriented. You can do fighting in the game. There's aliens to fight. There's all that stuff. But I try to design a game that's capacious in that sense, so you don't have to do one or the other. It's not just mercenaries, murder hobos, and it's not just sort of a social game. It can be both.
I was impressed by how flexible this is, like you were saying, for the types of stories you can tell with it. Because when I see like, oh, this is a derelict space station full of mystery and horrors below a certain level, and you explore these space hulks that maybe have atmosphere for humans, maybe not, and you go to these other long lost Terran colonies, it leans, in my mind, to horror. But this game is not a horror game. It can be. It has the capability of, especially with the grit mechanic, which we'll get into that later on. But it has, like you said, the capacity to tell such broad stories that for just a quick start rules alone that you have on itch, it's an incredibly deep game.
Oh, thank you. The immediate inspirations are things like Alien, which is science horror, right? So there are other games out there that do science horror and really focus on that, regardless of mechanics and stuff. I think those games have great settings and it makes sense. But what I wanted to do, like say, was capture some of the energy of the zaniness of D&D and old school revival versions of D20 games, where you could be riding a dinosaur with a long sword for some reason, and it just feels like a way to explore societies otherwise. Because I think one of the dangers of hard SF, this sort of alien Blade Runner universe, where you're trying to figure out, well, what would it really be like, is that because the present, if we're trapped in a kind of neoliberal dystopia already, you just extend that into the future for one. And so I think it's actually a little boring, is one of my issues with like cyberpunk and some of that. I think biopunk's more interesting because it flips just the foundation of our world. So instead of stuff being built and it's hard and it's electronic and it's made in a factory, it's grown, it has to be cared for in some way. So I think, for example, Dark Sun setting in D&D was a huge influence on me in childhood when the revised Dark Sun came out, and it was about these halflings who grew all their clothes out of like this kind of yeast algae shit, and it stuck with me forever. I was like, that is the world that I want to explore in some way. I mean, and you can tell all kinds of different stories. They can still be about politics. You can still go fight monsters, but it didn't feel as overdone as a kind of Tolkien-esque, I played all these games in Forgotten Realms and it was fun, but it was like, forget that. We're going to go to the desert planet where you're growing your still suit out of, algae, and you ride a pterodactyl. So I think for me, you can have horror, and I've done definitely scenarios that are more creepy where, okay, you're on an abandoned, this sort of MacGuffin ultra civilization that has more or less immediately killed themselves essentially for some reason, about 5,000 years ago. So in the world of the game, there's been sort of dark age rebuilding of civilization over 5,000 years, but they're called the late Tefnians. And so they pop up all over the place. It means humans who were very advanced and they left behind all this dangerous tech. And so there's all these late Tefnian hulks, these ships that are beautiful, weird. I mean, their ships just look bizarre because they're using nanotech. And so they sort of don't even look, they look more like the Farscape ship, right? They're kind of organic. Right. And you go there and it's like, that's a great horror setting, just like, in an Alien style game, a more sort of hard SF cyberpunky box ship that's just empty, that's just a freighter or whatever. And the horror can be derived from that kind of moment of there's a single monster that wants to kill you. It can be derived from other things. And something I've done a lot to mess with, and these are somewhat spoilers because I want to publish these eventually as ventures, but I have run a few ventures where, the first monster you meet isn't really the threat. It's actually there for some other reason. Or it is threatening, it will attack you, but you can avoid it and just sort of watch it. And what it's doing leads you to something else. And the real horror I try to set up, and I would do this, I've done this with Call of Cthulhu in Game Set and other times, but is not the horror of the monster who wants to kill you, because in some ways it's only frightening in the very basic fight or flight sense of will I live or die? And if you're a bunch of murder hobos and you're not really, you're pretending to be a bunch of well-armed mercenaries. You may not even be that scared. What I think is scarier sometimes are making people confront moral choices. So what if the monster needs your help to do something? What if you have to make a hard choice between, two goods or two not great outcomes, and how to sort of get players to almost feel like it's going to be an alien monster horror, but then they sort of end up in this more political social place. And I think there's an elegant way to do that. And I think you could do that in other games, but I try to kind of design a setting around that where you can have a lot of those switcheroo encounters where it almost doesn't, you can fight the thing or not. But hey, the real problem is you got to get all the people off the ship and you don't have enough time to get everyone off. Or there's this strange nanite plague. The horror is coming from another element of the world. And I think, honestly, this is, again, I just, with everyone else, saw the show The Expanse. I never read The Expanse, but I think they do that quite well in that show where they often have a kind of switcheroo. And I think where the episodes that aren't as good are just the straight up, let's go fight stuff in space. The episodes that are better are about political choices, moral choices, environmental effects. We didn't know that this planet had this form of alien life that is microscopic, but it can harm us in some way. So I think that kind of stuff appeals to me more just as the way I think. Not to knock, but straight up horror is dope too. So
I think that's where sci-fi is at its best. Horror or not, it's just when it's not so evident and obvious, and it makes you actually ask those tough questions, because that's what speculative fiction exists to do, is to make us go, let's consider what we're doing here, the implications of it long term, and what that looks like. Stillfleet is doing that from what I see, and I'm glad it's in good hands with you as a designer, because you seem to completely get that. It's a rare and wonderful thing. One thing I was intrigued about is the game seems like it could get dark, because you're dealing with things like an arch-capitalist society and its far extremes. But you make several references in your Patreon posts about what the game is, about humor, and that there's a very dry sense of humor throughout this game. Why was it so important for you to make sure that people knew that this was not just a grim, dark game, and that there actually was a lot of, maybe not intentional humor, but perhaps actually very intentional humor throughout it?
I try to make it somewhat intentional. And I think it's for a couple of reasons. I think one is in a sort of impulse as a reader, and someone who's lived with this kind of nerd culture for forever, that I think a writer named M. John Harrison, who I just think is so good, captures perfectly in these books called Viraconium and his writing about these stories and books, which is basically the shifting, it's kind of a dying Earth fantasy setting. But every time you read about it, it's different. And it seems like it's kind of making fun of the last iteration. And you realize it's just kind of a version of like Thatcher era London in a medieval setting, but on a dying world. But it's not a direct parody. And it has very sincere, very human stories. The really gripping, great fantasy stories, but it's also obviously kind of molting constantly. It has this layered approach where you kind of get the satire, you get the umami and the sweet at the same time. And so it's a kind of interesting narrative flavor that maybe some people wouldn't enjoy, but I thought was just like the most amazing stuff when I read it. And I think you get some of that sometimes with like Le Guin or James Tiptree / Alice Sheldon. You have these writers who have moments, China Medieval. I can think of a lot of stories I've read where there is a moment of humor. And I think it's all about where on a kind of spectrum you want to be. If you want to be ultra sincere, that can be really good too. And if you just want to make fun of stuff and you're just doing like Rick and Morty, that can be fun too. I think, for me, the middle is better. And I do tend to, I still like that kind of, fainting with one hand and you're doing something else with the other. So it looks very serious, but actually it's pretty parodic on a lot of levels. It's making fun of stuff and not taking itself too seriously, kind of consistently in certain ways. Whereas in other ways, it's pretty easy to grok. For example, it wouldn't make sense. It's not a cartoon like Adventure Time. You don't have like everything in the world is cute and talking and animated. It looks dark and it would feel dark. And when we talk with the players a lot about the taste, the smells, it's something I think I've really enjoyed, is exploring what would it be like? You've been trapped on this sort of station. You're finally going to go out, and like the first time you experienced real Earth-like gravity and the brightness of a real sol, you just puke or whatever. It's like there's something dark about it, but also funny, but also true. And I think trying to find those, trying to weave them into the game, write rules around them, have gentle mockery. It's something that I was struggling with, how to bring it to life beyond my own sort of way of working. Okay, it's in Google Docs and there's just chunks of paragraphs. And it's really great to work with the designer, Eric Lazar, because he said immediately he saw the solution of, oh, no, I know what we're going to do. This paragraph becomes this little green box over here. This paragraph becomes this kind of weird gray text that's over the top of the main text. And he actually was able to visualize he said, you're writing with like 3 or 4 different voices that are different levels of seriousness. Some of them are this storytelling where you're in the world and it's very real to the character. And some of it is the game designer just kind of saying, well, here's how you do the rules. and maybe I drop a reference to, to explain in reference to something else, and maybe make fun of, something a character did once in that process. And then sometimes it's full on, satire, or it's a meta note saying, well, really, if you want to mess with them, here's kind of a funny way to get the PCs to do something in this encounter. And so I think having that visualization helped me even in terms of writing and editing, thinking like, oh yeah, like that is what I'm doing. I am thinking at different registers of seriousness. That is intentional. In terms of other things that do this, I really think it is always on a spectrum, and sometimes it's a knife's edge and sometimes it doesn't work. So like, I think a lot of people in science fiction studies talk about like, Starship Troopers, right? It was meant to be a parody of the kind of early populist far right, dangers of like rah, rah, rah military and, sole remaining hyperpower. And people didn't get it. It was just like, oh no, this is rad, like shoot the aliens. Yeah, aliens are bad. Others is bad. And so it was kind of, it didn't work on the American audience in the way Van der Hoeven like wanted or whatever. And I think you see that with like Warhammer too, right? Like not to knock Games Workshop, but I think it's maybe the same idea. I actually can't tell sometimes whether we're falling on the, oh no, this is just fascism in space, or this is like making fun of that and you're allowed to subvert it. And I think with Stillfleet, I really wanted to make it clearer that we're mostly on the side of making fun of the company is bad, and at the same time, it is all you know. And I think that was just this real desire. And I think hopefully Eric and Ethan would agree, it's something I think they kind of got immediately as well, is like, oh yeah, like we live in a world like that, right? Like there's things that are just bad, but they're structural and I can't change them personally, at least very easily. I mean, it might take my whole life to change some aspect in a meaningful way. So I have to make that choice. And I think that puts it on the players to say, okay, what does your PC want to do here? You probably can't make the world a utopia, because guess what? That's really hard, but you might be able to do something good, and I think that's a little different than in a fantasy world where everything is either good or bad. And you just have to walk around slaying the bad stuff and the good stuff will kind of regulate itself. That's adventure time and that's fun, but it's kind of a little kid version. And to me, I haven't played that version of the game in a long time.
With the politics part of this game, is there a system for the players to involve themselves with the politics of it, to deal with the company directly? Or is it more just that's the narrative part of the game? The DM can explore that if they want to, and the players want to.
Yeah, I think it started as more the latter, and then I think we're now formalizing some things that have worked really well and are kind of also, again, chances for real humor and moments that are different from fighty moments or con artist or seduction moments. I mean, so for example, the MacGuffinry of the game is you're void miners. So you're just people who are hired by the company to go out into space or onto Goldilocks worlds and basically do the bidding of the company, which could be assassinate someone. It's often boring, or it's just exploratory, go explore a thing and see if there's anything of worth, report back. It's always in, stress throughout the book in the diegetic kind of passages that you have to write a really full report. And it's really important no matter what happens. It doesn't really matter if you all die. You have to get a report back and any useful tech back to the company. And if you don't, you're in breach of contract. That was an opportunity for me to mess with my players. And I always just did that, but it wasn't formalized. And as we've played with more and more and more random people who are great, they actually sort of have pressed that formalization process. And we've come up with ideas like, okay, when you write the report, so whoever writes it rolls charm. So usually it's the witness, the class that is the kind of anthropologist, journalist, priest, peacemaker. And, they usually would have the highest charm die. And so they're going to write the best version. But you have to tell me, you have to bullet point to the GM. You don't have to actually write it, but you have to bullet point anything you left out that really matters, right? Anything you lied about, so that I know what is in there. And we have a kind of contract. We've actually written it down. It's somewhere in my notes, and we can go back to it. So if you refactor, your boss finds out, they can try to investigate, right? And then there's actually a number, so you've set a kind of a difficulty for them, and I can roll and say, okay, how smart is this person? How much time, how many times are they going to look into this? It's like a formalization that isn't totally necessary. You could just do it without die rolling, but it also kind of makes it funny, because if they roll really poorly, it's like, oh man, you just really like went off the rails with this one part and kind of, elaborated a lot, and that raised some flags. And a lot of it, I think, also is just about like money, which I am intentionally, so it's weird because it's a game about an evil company that wants money, but also it's post scarcity. So you don't need, like, they're going to give you food. The food is just like algae. It's just like bars of algae that will keep you alive, have total nutrients, no flavor. And you have room. I mean, there's plenty of room. So you don't need to pay for anything per se, but everyone, of course, is trying to earn money to buy, luxury goods, and just because that's how money actually works. It's a kind of fetishization of that economic system. And so in a weird way, I wanted PCs to be put in that position of like, look, if you're going to go be a murder hobo and fight space goblins, you're not doing it because you have to per se. You could just like have been the kind of person who works back on the station and you'd be fine. you're doing it because you have some interest in exploring the wider cosmos, and finding this lost tech and maybe helping people, whatever it is. So it again is all trying to reinforce that idea of like, hey, why are you doing the things you're doing? So the money, all the money-based stuff, the fact you get paid for each venture, the pay goes up with level, and you can get bonuses for things. And there's kind of rules for that. There's rules for designing a venture, which is really, you could do procedurally generate. They're all rollable tables, and it can be totally wild and random. But the money is a MacGuffin also. It's all just kind of pushing you toward making those choices. The money's useful for other reasons because also you can buy stuff with it, and players do naturally kind of want to hoard it and use it for, oh man, I want to save up and buy this really expensive restored exosuit. On the worlds that aren't controlled directly by the company in some way, the company has these trading outposts on these Goldilocks worlds where humans have lived for however long they've been there. But, a lot of the worlds, it's like their money isn't valued as much. And that's often a switcher idea where on Spindle, you're rich. You go to this province and they're demanding 4 times the price because your coins are big pads of mushroom leather, mycelium, tarred over black and stamped with the symbol of the company. And like to them, it's like, this is garbage, this is worthless. So I think there's a lot you can do with politics in games that is a little bit like the old like downtime rules, like running your domain. It's not a management sim, it's not like
Right.
how are your horses doing? Like, do they need more hay? It's a little more like there's a power imbalance between you and your boss. How much are you lying to them? How much are you malingering? And I think it, like I say, you don't need to put rules to it, but we're exploring that, and we're also exploring, and this is way down the line, but like a whole game where you are, which is very much inspired by the game Paranoia, where instead of void miners, instead of heroic mercenaries in space, you are just random people on the space station who are now going to be embroiled in some sort of spy plot, but you're not actually good at stuff. You're not trained. You don't have weapons. That's a different game. But I think that will be very much simulating some of those political interactions that are behind the scenes that you just kind of assume in the present version of the rule book must happen, right? Somebody must decide, okay, well, this month, we have this many Waitons, the giant bug people, immigrating in. And so we need to go down and make sure some rooms are habitable. I mean, it's just sort of like, normally that would never come up. You could make a game around it, and what goes wrong. I also think this just raises another sort of inspiration, because you asked me about inspirations. Like everything to me is also trying to get at just the feel of the Coen brothers movies. Like they tell these great stories where somebody thinks they're a badass. It's a badass cop. It's a badass criminal. Inevitably, you realize, first of all, that person, screws up, something goes wrong. And also the ordinary person, the cop who's just about to retire, who's not particularly brilliant, becomes more important. It's like there's sort of switcheroos with the whole valence, if you will, the whole, direction of what it means to be cool and like dangerous. And I think that they do a good job of both dealing with really serious stuff that actually happened, but also flipping it, it's satire, and it's kind of making fun of the sort of American obsession, I think, with sort of outlaw stories and making fun of the fact that, man, the origins of those are quite dark and have a lot to do with real systemic, problems, the settler colonial nature of the state. And so the fact we keep telling these kind of stories about, glorifying bank robbers and whatnot, I mean, I think they do a good job finding the humor and finding the politics without making it either egregiously silly or egregiously political. It's not an Aaron Sorkin, it's not people yelling at each other in a courtroom. It's Brad Pitt's in a closet and he gets shot in a tracksuit, and he's spying, and it just all goes wrong, and it's that moment of like, whoa. And that moment, I feel like I've tried really hard to get to with games, like again and again, where how do you do that in an RPG? Even if it's, in space on a magic planet with elves, you know what I mean?
Right. When I was reading it, I was thinking like this game, it cuts a fine line between a narrative focused game like your Apocalypse World and OSR. And I don't know, maybe I was thinking OSR just because of all the tables towards the end.
Yeah.
But it really does, like, it has a certain level of granularity that you need to tell these sorts of stories. But you also have all the empowerment to fully ignore everything if you want to and just proceed with telling the story that you and your players are interested in. It empowers DMs and players to say, okay, here's the stone, we have the rough stone, and now we can craft of this what we want.
I like that. Yeah,
No,
I mean, I think
that wasn't a question, I guess.
no, but the tabular nature of the OSR. I mean, I try to make everything rollable tables because I think it's really fun. I just use that a lot myself. Like in GM, like often first time GMs will approach me, like my friend Ethan, had played, but he never run games until recently. And he said, oh, I'll try running Stillfleet. And it's like, what you need inevitably is just like a list of stuff that could happen, I think, because you can either force stuff to happen, which is one approach, but if you have a more sandbox style world, so even with this game, right, you get some contract, but again, the contract isn't the story. The contract is the framework for the story.
Right.
And then the tables can help you fill it in either randomly, or you can have actually sort of secret things that are going to happen. Some of that might depend a little on your players and your play style that everyone prefers. And some of it might be like planning. Like when I run one-offs, it is literally random, right? I'll often just have tables of things that could happen, and we'll see. I often do have sort of some top level, like, here's the kind of interesting secret thing that you're going to inevitably find out and have to make a choice about. But how you get there is procedurally generated, and you can play it that way. You can also use this game like any game. You could just write everything out and make the party sort of go from A to B to C. I think, again, that's that idea of capaciousness. I don't want people to feel like you have to do, there's no wrong or right way. It's a game,
Yeah. So let's talk about the mechanics a little bit. Let's get into the resolution, the grit, and all that fun stuff.
Like mini games, this came out of playing a lot of, D&D, White Wolf games, Numenera, and, certainly Apocalypse World games, and a lot of OSR versions of, okay, well, there's a D20 system. What do we like about it? What do we not like? The big switch for me from like some version of that OSR world to my own system was just this insight that, like, why do you have two things? Why do you have a score that's a primary score that you never use, and then the derived secondary score in the D20 game, which is a number, whatever, and that's what you do use. And so Apocalypse World said, okay, we'll just do that. But then I thought, why do you always have to add or subtract a number? Why not just make it a range, right? So if it's 1 to 6, you roll a D6, right? Then you don't have to add anything. You're going to get a number without adding or subtracting. And you could do that for all the die, and then you have a pleasurable series of ranges. So then it's just a matter of how those interact. Okay, maybe, obviously D4 is usually going to lose, quote unquote, compared to a D20. So what we found very quickly with experimentation is the nice range in Stillfleet basically is your scores range from D4 to D12. Now, if you encounter an advanced alien, so some species, these post-humans, the Farzanjin, that are just kind of a stand-in for ultra, aliens that are in some sort of UFO spider-like, they have D20s, right? This person is some intelligence that has advanced technology. It's just faster than you, smarter than you. You can maybe get the jump on it. It's not immortal. It's just a lot smarter and faster than you. So, that's kind of the range we've settled on. It's like D4 to D12 represents, essentially normal, whatever that means, which of course there is no normal, but, D6, right, represents basically someone who's not trained in any particular way. D4, someone who, for whatever reason, that skill they're not as proficient in. And we've had people play that all kinds of different ways. We have people play characters with different abilities. And that's actually really fun. And so, D8 would be like you're trained, you're pretty good. D10 is like you're elite at something. And D12 is like the limit of normal human, like you're amazing. And so as heroes, in this version of the game in Stillfleet, and again, we've done it different ways, but normally you get, a series of die to assign to your scores. There's only 5 scores. You're always rolling one of those scores. And you assign, a D12, a D10, a D8. So you're pretty good at stuff. And then 2 D6s. You can swap one of the D6s for another D8. So you can be kind of bad at something, but it made you, and focus your brain somewhere else. That's not really how that works. But, of course, trying to be fair, that distribution seems really great. Usually you're rolling against someone else. So you're trying to beat them. And if you initiated the action, you win on a tie. If they initiated, they win on a tie. So if I roll my combat score to hit you and you roll your movement score to dodge, I just have to get the same number or better. You'll quickly find that if you have a D6 combat because you're the anthropologist and I have a D12 because I'm a space marine, I'm more likely to hit and do damage. But of course, you could be really fast. Maybe I'm not the fastest person. So the scores are combat, movement, reason, will, and charm. And just picked 5 words, kept them neutral. Since then, I have had pushback where it's like, well, why not make them more fun, like dance or like berserk? I think I'd be open to that. That might be like a version 2. I'd like to publish the kind of neutral version, it's still a wacky game, but the version where the score names are fairly neutral and there's just these 5. I think there's tons of other stuff you can do with it. And we have played around with other kinds of scores. So there's like a mech version where it's like these biomechs that you have to kind of keep imagining, like, to kind of like keep moving them forward, that you're an 80-foot tall monster, right? It's like very hard to imagine actually piloting an Evangelion kind of thing. So that, you maybe have a score that's like your stability, right? Your quantum, like your ability to imagine this thing to do anything. So that's a different mechanic that we're trying to make work. But for the main game, it works nicely, it seems, to have the 5 scores. And then from those you derive, your 2 pools, which are linked, health and grit. And health is like any other game. When you're out of health, you can't act. You're knocked out, you're dying, whatever. Grit is everything else. Grit is all the powers in the game. Nothing happens when you're out of grit. You're just tired and you can't use any of your class powers. So grit is different for every class, but it's usually something like reason and will, your max reason, your max will. So if you, really trained in something, you're going to have more grit. And then health is always movement and combat, the max of those 2 things. So again, if you're like a fighty type, you'll be harder to kill, basically. So it's an abstraction, seems to work fairly well. There's lots of ways to sort of play with that in practice. But the grit mechanic has been, I think, a big success, along with the scores of die. I think those are the two sort of innovations that I've kept steady, and they've worked really well. Some of that is just flattening the ontology of the different powers. So a lot of games have different lists of powers for different classes, and it gets a little confusing, and they don't really match one-to-one. This game, every power we've actually put in a big spreadsheet. And it's just like all powers are just powers, and they have grit costs. So your access to them varies, but I mean, it's real easy to swap in and out. You can redesign a class on the fly, right? You say, okay, well, instead of this power, you get that other one. And it just makes it a little easier to sort of adjudicate, figure shit out on the fly. The other thing I would just bring up is boost. I mean, the core thing that makes, I think, grit also different than just some sort of generic points is this game has a gambling mechanic called boost. So anytime you roll the die for any reason, you can burn 3 grit, 6 grit, or 9 grit to get a +3, a +6, or a +9, which is huge, right? If you burn 9 grit, which might be at first level like most of your grit, then you might get, or like half your grit, right? You're getting a huge boost. You're almost definitely going to win, but you still lose on a 1. So if you roll a 1, it's wasted. Generally, of course, if you're fighting average soldier guy who can't boost, most NPCs, I don't let them boost, even though theoretically they have grit, right? But they're not heroes. Right. Then he only has a D8. You're rolling a D8 +9. You're probably going to win. You could lose. If you're fighting that alien who's a D20, then actually it's just kind of evening out. So it's not as clear like, oh, you're definitely going to win. It just makes you slightly less likely to instantly lose. So those mechanics, the fact that 1 is still a failure, and you can always boost, but you have to call it before you roll. It's a free action. You have to call it. And you only have so much grit per day. At some point you're going to run out. You're going to be tired. You have to go get some sleep, get some food in you. And so this idea of like forcing players to make that judgment, that is the other really fun thing mechanically that I think parallels nicely, because it's very different from forcing them to make political, moral decisions, right? Like one is weighty and they're thinking about it in the back of their mind. The other is this snap like, oh, you round the corner and the me-go turn and their chromatophoric lasers begin to like home in on you. Are you trying to flee? Are you trying to hurt this person? Are you trying to convince them that actually, I'm very dangerous? That, it's like that makes you do snap judgments about numbers. And I know that most people are not good enough to really, and you can never predict the future. So even if you make really good calls on the math of like, yeah, if I just burned 3, I'm almost definitely gonna make it. You still sometimes lose because it's random, and you still might run out because you encounter something else. So for me as the GM, and that's what I'd say to first time GMs of this game specifically is it's all about grit management and just making players boost a lot. And making them feel real big wins, like really being a champion of theirs when they succeed. And when they fail, punishing them, being like, yeah, you grind your chainsword just past the Amigo, and it points its, basically a tentacular wrist at your head and shoots you in the face with a laser for like a ton of damage, And I think that's made the game feel very lively. It's not that other games don't have that. They just do it different ways. I think this one works really well. I'm partial to it, but you could achieve similar things other ways. I really like this one because it fits, for me, a certain balance and range where like D4 to D12, those die are large. There's a large enough expanse of numbers in there to be fun, but it's easy to do all the math. It's just, it's like, I think it's eliminated a lot of problem of D20 system games or games where you have a lot of successes where you have to kind of look stuff up and keep track of stuff. Usually in Stillfleet, you're rolling a die and you're adding at most like, again, +3, +6, +9, or maybe you have a +1. And that's the kind of stuff that usually I don't think people mind too much doing that mental math. But yeah, it's one solution. I'd at least like to put it in the world and see how other people use it. Maybe we'll change it eventually or offer other versions, but I think this version does work.
I'm glad you brought it up because I had a question just about boosting because I thought it was such an elegant mechanic for this game because like you said, it doesn't inundate players with math, but it gives them a very interesting choice every single time they touch a die. And it's that like, ooh, okay, I really need to stab this dude, but I can't use the powers if I fuck it up. So.
I mean, the other linked thing is that you can burn health to be grit, which represents like you're basically doing the powering up Super Saiyan Akira. You're going to give yourself an aneurysm at some point, right? Like this is bad, but you could do it. So you can convert 3 health to 1 grit. And because of that, we've had so many games now, final moments, you're trying to get off this rock, you're being attacked, and the Banshee needs to open the Stiffworks, it needs to get the portal open back to Spindle. And it's like, to do it is just a massive amount of grit. It's very hard. It's technically hard. It's literally physically difficult for some reason. It's gigantic. It's not built by humans, whatever. They're built by the snake men, and you have to practically chop off an arm to power it because it runs on human blood just to punish you, And so to do that, it's like, okay, I'm just going to burn all my health except 1 to get that grit, to burn the grit, to do the thing. And then I have 1 health and I'm standing in front of the open portal and we're getting shot at. And sometimes that's really lucked out and everyone just see the goal, hands in the air. And then other times someone dies tragically, and it's that moment of mourning when you're like, man, you really tried, huh? Like you went out like a G, you actually really pushed yourself to the limit. And I actually, as a GM, I always allow players to be saved and make them have to choose. Like they're like, no, I mean, I died, I'm out. And other times they're like, no, I mean, I let someone save me. I think you can play it different ways. I've just found in games, in terms of that darkness, it allows the player to choose their level of darkness. They can be really morbid and like happy about, like Dungeon Crawl classic kind of mill style where like, oh, I'm dead, roll another one. Or they can be a little bit more concerned about like, yeah, but in real life, my friend is a trained doctor with like a medi gadget and stabs me with it and it stabilizes me. I mean, it makes a kind of sense. But yeah, I definitely think the boosting mechanic brings those big rolls even to a higher place without extending the math too much, because you can get to the higher place with rolling a ton of die in Shadowrun, but you have to roll all those little die and count them up. You can get to that place with D20 games, but it's a weird like, wait, this creature has resistance and I have a thing that if I once per day spend a sorcery point, it's just like, I don't think it's elegant personally. It's not as fast. But yeah, bigs ups and downs are a part of RPGs, and for me it's just fun to it's part of the game design thing, I think, of like, well, how do I make a big up and down in a new way?
Yeah, absolutely. So by the time this episode airs, your Kickstarter will have wrapped up successfully, the one that's going on right now.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell us about Subtle Fluid?
Well, thank you for asking. We wanted to do a Kickstarter for Zine Quest 3 because we're still not ready with the core rulebook, so we have some modules out that are the quick start is pay what you want, so that's definitely the place to start. And it's not trying to be the whole game for a number of reasons. I mean, partially it's really just like it takes a long time to design and illustrate and to carefully edit. And in the careful editing process, even something we've play tested a million times, I mean, you just sort of end up with questions. And even the stuff that's in market now, Wayfarers and the Quick Start, we have now gone back and said, we really need to restrict heal because it actually, the math doesn't work. It has to be something you can only do X number of times, in a moment. So powers, will inevitably get tweaked for the core rulebook. That's fine. But we wanted to do a zine, and in the spirit, I talked with Eric and Ethan. It's like, what is something that feels very zine-y? That's not just a chapter that we're going to make into a standalone module. What's something that's just like weird, cuts across the game in a fun way? And we settled on nanotechnology. So in the game, there's 6 strata. So there's 6 like levels of tech, and nano is one of the highest. Or sorry, there's 7 actually, because there's the Escher-esque. There's just stuff that is so alien that no human has ever figured out how it works. But so there's 6 that humans kind of understand the principles of. And nano's quite up there. It's the second to the highest in that ranking. And that determines grit cost usually for this architect, this advanced tech stuff. And the whole idea of nanites is that there's a class that uses nanites, and thus they have access to all these powers that no one else has access to. You could gain access if you find the right nanites that won't kill you and will give you some of those powers. But this class begins, the presumption at some point in their life they tried this essentially what might look like, a shot of liquor, but actually is a suspension of trillions of robots that are just a few atoms in size and that are able to live in a human body. They're made actually to live in a human body, repair it, chasing out free radicals and lipids, managing your body in some way. And this is, people propose this, right, as the future of medicine and the future of all kinds of things. So what if you could control them? What if you could spew them out of your nose, this cloud of blood forms and makes, a weapon when you need it, or opens a door by going into the circuitry of the system and reprogramming it? What would that feel like? So, there's a class in the game called the Blooder, and there's all these rules for the blood. And we wanted to do a zine just about that stratum of technology. So we included the class, we include all the rules and all the powers. We actually doubled the number of powers. So there's a ton of powers now. We had a great power submission from a patron, so we're including that. We have a bunch of items. So we included all the items we'd written and then some bunch more. And what we also did is just come up with all this culture stuff, because it's like, okay, the idea is 5,000 years ago, the civilization of humans had all those nanites, and they were so advanced, they went to the stars, and then they all died, they all fought each other horribly, MacGuffin ending. You've found some of this stuff, and mostly it just looks like dirt, or it's just, it's wasted. I mean, if it's not in you, it's just not usable. But you found a suspension that still works. You drink the nanites, you have the powers. Well, what does that like? What does it feel like? Maybe it makes you eat different foods. So we have all this stuff about, like, what are the quirks? What if you actually are one of these people who's been in suspension for 5,000 years in a bath of, cryogenic gel with the nanites repairing your cells as needed? Right now we don't think that's possible, right? And I don't think that's probably ever possible, but it pushes the limits, but it doesn't feel like magic per se. It feels like something from technoscientific imaginaries that we're saying, okay, let's open that up. What if? So in this, zine, we have all this stuff about what if you're a sleeper, you awaken 5,000 years later, these early modern adventurers with Glocks and duct tape space helmets have found you, and you're just like hungry because your nanites want to just strip everything around you of whatever atoms they need. You're kind of out of it. And you also are wondering, like, well, who won the war? Where's my husband, my kid? And it's, you know what I mean? It's like those people have been dead for a long time, but also these early modern adventurers don't know what you're saying. So the whole idea of the encounter and the origin of that character, and how do you kind of join the company as one of these sleepers who's, using nanites still successfully, even if it's slowly making you go insane or changing your body in crazy ways. So we have all these sort of quirks. What diseases would you get that are caused by the nanites? How would it change your body? So we thought through, not just expanding the rules, but also expanding the world of that stratum of tech. And it won't appear in the core rulebook. It's not a chapter because it's just stuff that it's flavor, but it's also extra rules. It's a lot of optional rules about wetware. So what if you have a tattoo gun full of nanites, and that's back on Spindle, right? They've hacked that technology with stuff they understand. They understand tattooing and they have some nanites. Well, maybe I can safely inject them that way and it won't kill you. Let's try. So yeah, a lot of it was just coming up with fun stuff. A lot of it came from patrons. So we did ask, so we're very active on Discord, and we just asked people, what should we put in a zine about this topic? And some of it's still getting worked out because we had some bespoke content. So by the time you hear this, it'll be solidified. But right now we still have some room for, custom callouts and custom adventures. I think that's really fun to me, is just kind of the improv idea of, like, someone has an idea. Okay, how can we take that and riff on it, make it work in Stillfleet in a canonical way that is fun and also sort of fulfills that person's goal of, like, oh, they want an adventure where I fight, a giant crab, or everyone's miniaturized or something. I don't know, like, whatever thing they come up with, we're going to make happen. So yeah, I'm excited. It's the first time we're printing anything. So we decided in the spirit of Zine Quest, again, we would try to really get this printed through a vendor we felt would not screw it up. And in the future, we'll probably use all environmentally friendly union labor, like fancy stuff that is going to cost more and just take more time to do. But for this project, we went with, Drive-Thru RPG is just very solid. Like, they do a lot of games. So we said, we've bought stuff from them. It's fine. We're going to print through them this first time, just do that experience. We've all worked together on printed projects in various ways, but this is, for Stillfleet, it's a new brand. For 10 years almost, it's been evolving for me as, like, PDFs I've written, myself, right? With no art. So this is very different to say, okay, I have a professional designer, professional artist helping me on the side do it. What do we want to do, and how do we want to get that to people, get their feedback, get them excited? And it just felt like, Zine Quest is such a great thing. I mean, it is ultimately about buying stuff, but I have to say it's about supporting creators who are just having fun, and it's usually pretty small amounts of money. And I end up buying a ton of $5 PDFs, and I really enjoy, usually there's like one idea per thing at least that I latch onto. Sometimes it's a lot more. And, it just feels good to sort of feel like, well, that's a real human who just spent some time writing a thing because they had what they felt was a good idea. I love RPGs, and I love sort of supporting that dynamic. It's something we're all doing kind of after hours, right? So for maybe not all, for many of us, it's something that we're doing as a kind of hobby. So, we felt like Kickstarter, and anything else you can say about them. I mean, they have eventually, they're unionized and they have supported RPGs pretty heavily, it seems like, over the years. So we thought that was a cool way to get into the print world, get a different sort of channel open to talk to people about the game. And what we hope to do is within, maybe by the end of the year, do a big Kickstarter for their core rulebook, assuming that there's not some barrier to that in terms of, jobs and anything else. If we can get it done, if we can get it laid out, edited, all that, illustrated, I think Kickstarter is a great platform for this kind of content, where you can say to people, hey, if you want to support us, you can. Give them a couple options for that and really let them go nuts. And if they want more content, they can essentially pay more, and we will do more. I mean, we love this stuff. So I'm sure others feel the same way about their games. But we're very happy. We're very flattered with your reaction, frankly, because like I say, it's different to go from writing something for your friends to bringing it to that wider audience and opening yourself up a bit. When you get money involved, obviously, again, you're kind of setting the bar even higher, because people are, even if it's a small amount of money, they're still paying you something. So you kind of have to deliver. So hopefully, people, I mean, it sounds like you checked out, the Quick Start and thought it was all right. So, hopefully others feel the same.
Yeah, I can't wait to get the core rulebook in my hands. I'm going to play the hell out of this game. It looks really fun. It just seems like a game that I would have written if I had the wherewithal and gumption to do it. In terms of the aesthetic of it, I'm looking forward very much to the Kickstarter when that comes along. So let me know, please.
Definitely. We'll have to thank you. We'll have to shout out Pot of Blunders. Yeah, and come on the Discord. We do run games a lot. We try to run games with anyone, once a month, and we run games with patrons more frequently. And it's just ultimately it comes down to me and Ethan's time. But we of course we love it and we keep doing it. We're gonna have to more games because people keep joining. And one thing I definitely am interested in, there are a few GMs running Stillfleet now, and just hearing the stuff they come up with is so wild and so great. And it really it fits very nicely. I mean, I think people get the idea and they're running with it, which is like say that's the ultimate goal for me as a creator. I don't want to have to run every game myself, even though I'd love to. I actually love the idea that other people see some reason to use this mechanic and some reason to be in this universe.
Last question. Is
Sure.
there anything that we haven't talked about yet that you really want our audience to know?
No, I mean, I would just shout out, Fun City Ventures, which has been running this version of itself for the last year. Float City, which is using Stillfleet, is a really great narrative podcast that just tells stories set in future settings using RPGs, and the settings they've explored for Stillfleet have added to the game. They've brought things to life that I'd run with the guy who runs the podcast, but taking it in a different direction with different players is so wonderful, and to hear that kind of high production value story being told in worlds I've sort of created and with elements of games that I've come up with, and to hear them use the rules and have big successes, right? Big failures is really fulfilling. But beyond me personally, I mean, I just think it's another way the game's pressure tested, and I think it's done well, right? It's something that they've said, yeah, I mean, this works. We can do a whole sort of show about it. It's also just like wonderfully crafted. They're just good at their jobs. So it's a fun way, if you're not sure, just like, if you enjoy this kind of thing, checking them out is a good way to kind of get a sense of what the game's like, what some of these alien species you can play as are like, what some of the political struggles are. And, certainly, of course, you can also hop on Discord, talk with us, check out the quick start. We're around, and until we have that core rulebook, really it's not about asking for money or anything like that. It's just, if you like sci-fi, if you like sci-fi RPGs, and if you're into that kind of OSR tinkering, man, isn't there a better way to come up with these ideas that make RPGs really fun, simplified rule systems that are still robust enough to mimic all kinds of physics, then I think you'll like Stillfleet, and I dare you to come play a game and pretend to be a giant bug, a robot with no face that eats metal, and, just hang out with us.
Awesome. Hey, man, you've been an absolute delight. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it. I'll put all your contact information in the show notes so people can reach you and harass you with questions and praise and all the other well-deserved things you need, accolades up the ass. It's going to be great.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, man. It's really great talking to you.
Awesome, Wythe. Thank you so much. So, Wythe, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's been about a year and a month or two.
That sounds right. Yeah.
How's the last year been treating you?
It's still weird. There's still a pandemic and whatnot, but it's been good. We did publish more stuff. I mean, we're bringing the brand to life slowly but surely. So that's really fun, working on the game for forever. So it's nice to see it kind of emerge and get played.
So, I mean, one of the main reasons, I love talking to you, but one of the reasons we brought you back is because a week after this comes out, your Kickstarter for the core rules are coming out.
That's right.
That's incredible. That's awesome.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's been a lot of work, but, we finally have a hardback book mostly done, another, half done. And then we have lots of other products in development, including 2 full ventures, which will be a bit longer than the first one we published, but similar, and they'll be available in print and PDF. So basically, if you like the game, you can finally get the core rules, 1 venture, and then pretty soon after that, we'll be able to put out a lot more about the setting of the game world and a whole nother venture, both of which are very different. They're not written by me, and they bring a lot of different ideas to the game, which I really, really like. I love collaborating, and I love world building with players and with other GMs, and that's always been a goal of mine for the game. If it really was going to be bigger than like a homebrew hobby thing, which is fine, and I'm not knocking in any way, and that was what I did for a long time, for like over a decade. I had my friends play in this world and it felt fun, and I developed a whole system, but it wasn't meant to be, a business or a commercial game. And later, especially with the pandemic, people had pressed me to maybe publish it, get it out there in some form, try that, see how I liked it. And something I decided is, well, okay, I really don't want to be the only person writing, not out of like laziness or something, but like I want to write a lot of stuff. And I want the game to be more than that. I want people to take it in other directions, use it, hack it, whatever. Some of that will sort of Venn diagram with quote unquote, our brand or whatever. And some of it might be other people's homebrews, and that's completely fine. I think that's a healthy sign of like your game is big enough, even if it's quite small, that other people play it, right? That it's not just a thing for you and your friends. it's a tool that other people can use to have basically fun with their friends and think about, the future, technology, politics, the things we think make the game interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it would have to be a certain level of robust to be able to stand up to that. If you have one specific sandbox to play in, and someone goes, well, I want to play with this other thing. Well, it doesn't fit, and breaks apart. I mean, from what I've read from the quick start rules, from our conversations, this can hold up to that level of creative play.
Yeah, thanks. We definitely want it to. I wanted to, and I think the core rules certainly can. I think the game world can too. We've come up with lots of ideas. We've put a lot out there in various forums. People have been intrigued by various, aspects, and it was fun to work with two other writers to sort of think about, okay, well, here, what is the thing you want to sort of focus on? What do you want to nerd out on? And it was really funny with the second official venture. So, we published one originally with a quick start called Sleeper in the Sky that I wrote that is very much canonical. You're on a spaceship from 5,000 years ago that was a pleasure ship for these fantastically advanced post-humans, just filled with essentially cryogenically frozen dangerous aliens that you accidentally keep unleashing. And that was meant to just test out, okay, we'll give people a lot of snippets of the game at once and sort of keep you in one contained setting, hope you survive. There's a sort of noir plot going on that is why you're there. For the second book, our brand's web developer, we call them the Banshee. So Banshees are the characters in the game who are good at tech. They're the pilots. They can get through time-space gates. Aaron H., he's a really great developer, wanted to also, he's writing a game for his kids. He's playing with his sons. And we talked about publishing it because he'd written it all out and it had new rules. And it was all about, desert wilderness survival on this desert planet that's very briefly mentioned in the book. And I thought that was fun for a number of reasons. He asked me all these questions like, well, hey, on the planet, which way does the sun set? Or like, what's the axial tilt? Like this would affect weather patterns. And it's stuff that is fun to think about. It's also stuff I had never thought about and was never going to for that world. It's just one of the many worlds in the game that are mentioned. And I thought it was so fun to sort of give more or less complete control and say, go nuts, and work with someone else and read their writing, edit it, write a couple brief sections. I wrote a lot of weird technology for that venture to give it a little bit of a through line with some of the other materials. So it all feels equally kind of zany cosmic fantasy. But yeah, it was fun. And there's another one we're developing with a longtime GM and player named Jesse King, and hers is set, on a different world and is involving a very, very different plot. We call it Evil Willy Wonka. It's like a factory setting with these advanced aliens, and it raises a lot of moral questions about what is good work and what does it mean to have a good job, and like what should you do that is different than the core of Stillfleet. It's playing with some different things that I think will be fun, and we're going to publish it. With the design of that game is going to be, alien art forum. So you're reading like an art magazine about a thing that happened and an event, but it's a playable venture. So I think with each book, we really want to test like, can we do it weirder? Can we do it in a more fun way, and still maintain some through line so the reader knows what they're getting.
I love that this is a brand new game in terms of public availability for the core book, but you're still trying to push already. You're like, okay, this is a great platform. What can we do with it? How can we break this? How can we force it to go in this weird direction? I love that.
Yeah, that's what we want to do. I think from the beginning, Ethan and Eric and I, so the artist and designer who, helped me 3 years ago, think, okay, let's really try to make this a really available in the world product that looks good and is not just a Google Doc. And we all agreed, like, we're going to try to do it a little differently every time while maintaining some consistency. So the rules don't always change radically, but we'll add some new features. We'll sort of imply some new lore. And so there's a feeling of instability that I think is pleasurable when it's done right. And it all goes back, I say this a lot, but M. John Harrison's book, Viraconium, really blew my mind reading these science fictional series of novels and then just a bunch of short stories where it's the same world, but clearly it's like science fantasy, sort of dying Earth, but everything changes every time. So like once you've read one, you're like, okay, I understand the world. And you read another book and you're like, wait, like the rules are a little different. And it's very pleasurable, but I think it requires a real attention to detail and just a sort of obsession with that kind of almost like anti-world building, or it's like a kind of world building. So I think that's in there. I think the core rule book could stand on its own. I think people hopefully will like that as a unitary thing that makes sense and is not too confusing. But,
And I know this is not your first Kickstarter. It's not even your first Stillfleet-based Kickstarter.
That's right.
Are you nervous about it still, though? Or is there a part of you that's like, oh, man, I'm really putting a lot out there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really nervous. I can't speak for everybody else. I feel like they must be a little bit too, but it's with the first one, we were just testing the waters with the Zine Quest book. We did do it as it's available in print and PDF. It's a book called Subtle Fluid. It's about nanotechnology. So if you get the quick start, it adds, a class that is not in the quick start. and add some rules that are not in the quick start. They will be in the core rule book. A lot of the material in that book will not be in the core rule book because it is a magazine from 100 million years in the future minus 5,000 years. So it's from the past of the game. And it's showing off sort of weird nanotech stuff that was happening that is being translated by the archivists in the present of the game. Has some other sort of fun elements like that. So we wanted to make something unique, but that was testing the waters. It was meant to be more of a zine. It feels more like a magazine in the sense that we do a little bit sort of higher design stuff than like like a saddle stitch bound true zine. But that was fun. And we didn't use it as a vehicle to launch the brand or try to like make a bunch of money or something because we didn't, we weren't ready. Now I think we're still not necessarily thinking, we're going to make a lot of money, but we do want to launch the brand. We'd like to sell enough books, PDF and print, where people really are playing it in a self-sustaining way, and it doesn't require a ton of effort to explain that it is a system, that it's an option among many, and we think it's good for these reasons, and here's what it costs, and here's how you get all the stuff. And then we can focus on just adding to that game, right? To some degree. I mean, of course, we'll still have to, we'll go to cons, we'll market it, but it is nerve-wracking. It's nerve-wracking because what if we fail? It's nerve-wracking because what if we succeed? But it's always at that level of we got to put in a lot of work to just get some people engaged. And I don't know, we're all testing this stuff out. We have day jobs and we're big fans. We're long players, but we're not the most young, savvy, hip marketers. So we're trying stuff that makes sense to us and learning as we go. And we're really appreciative, especially of the folks at Fun City Ventures who, ran the game for a year on their podcast, which is an amazing podcast. I love the Shadowrun version as well. But it was great to have that to sort of show people look, it's a real game. It works. You can play it with your friends for an extended period of time. Hopefully over time, there'll be more examples of people just picking it up. And hopefully that makes it easier to have a book finished product that you can buy.
I mean, I cannot tell you how excited I am to have this book in my hands. We're going to be running a couple episodes.
Cool.
It's coming up after this interview drops. So I'm very excited to do that. Before I let you go, I want to be sensitive to your time. I know you came back to talk to me, and I appreciate that. Is there anything that you want to tell our listeners before I let you go? Is there anything about the campaign coming up that they should be excited for?
Yeah, that's thanks for asking. That's really a big question in a way. I mean, we're excited to just have the Stillfleet core rulebook Kickstarter launch August 1st. The book will be available, as a reward as a PDF or a physical book. If you get the physical book, of course, you get the PDF. You can also add on, as another reward tier, the venture, the Rain Thieves, which is our second official venture. It's set on this desert planet. It's got all these rules for wilderness crawling, survival stuff, and it's quite long for a venture. It's got lots of setting details and encounters, so a lot of giant spiders. It's got a little bit of a pulpy hex crawl kind of vibe, which is a little different than some of the noir stuff that I tend to run and we'll be putting out more and more of. And that's available again. You can get the print or the PDF, and that'll be a softback book as opposed to the hardback core rulebook. It's all really beautifully designed. The art is great. We've been working with some freelance artists who are really great, who also want to sort of thank. And you can find details on our Kickstarter page, which by this time will be ready to go. And we're also doing a couple events to support the show. So if you're in New York City, if you're in the region and you are up for a game, we're doing a game on Saturday, July 30th at Game Storia, the game store in Astoria, the neighborhood in Queens where we live. And the game will start at 1 p.m. The event starts at noon, and that'll be a full venture. So there's actually going to be optional, you can choose which game you want to play. You can play test the new venture before it's published. You can play a very, very zany game, or you can play with me more of a noir, dark game. And then we're going to do it again on Saturday, August 13th at night, actually. So it's a night game. The game will start at 7. People can start coming in at 6. And that's going to be a very dark, fun one with void worms that can control your mind. And yeah, those are just 2 things we're doing locally here. We would love to hear from anyone who's played the game, tried it with your friends. And, if there's game stores out there that are interested in the book, we are a little bit new to this, but, we definitely want to work with people and just really be good, collaborators too. We really love other creators. We love other indie games. We play a lot of them. And, we hopefully will build out Stillfleet as, a rule system that other people like enough to mess with, to hack and use however they want. Eventually, we will play test. I don't know if we'll do it. It might be a surprise add-on. So if you come out in New York, you might find out July 30th or August 13th. But, we're working on 2 different fantasy versions. And one, we're almost ready to drop a free, quick start and get people excited about that as well. So similar rules, but, very, very different world. and really playing around, making fun of some of those tropes. And that's led by our artist, Ethan Gould, who's, a really, really smart, funny game designer in his own right. So those are just some of the things happening. I will also shout out, we're having an original soundtrack we're working on with some amazing musical artists. So watch out for posts. I mean, you'll see news about that. There's probably other things that I should be mentioning, but that's more than enough. So, I don't want to just list everything that's on the Kickstarter page. I'm tempted.
I was already excited about this, and now I'm like beyond excited for this. I cannot wait for this Kickstarter to launch because I'm going to be your first backer. I don't know if you've had family or friends already promise to be that. They're wrong. It's going to be me. It's going to be like New Year's. The ball's going to drop. I'm going to be hopping on there to back this. I'm so excited for this game. It's going to be incredible.
Oh, thanks. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thanks for having us. And, anytime, we really look forward to the actual play. I hope you enjoy it. And, if you ever want to play a game, the invite's open, our Discord's open, our server is really happening in place. So
awesome. All right. Thanks, Wythe. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, man.
Hey, folks, it's Nate. Once again, thanks to Wythe for coming on the show twice. It's always a blast talking to Wythe. And in case you couldn't tell, I'm stupidly excited about this game coming out. Kickstarter should be coming out August 1st. If there's any updates or changes to that, I will probably end up reposting this with a new end matter or tweeting about it or some other thing to get the news out there. But August 1st for now is the date. So mark that in your calendars. Go look in the show notes for links to Wythe's Discord, to the Twitter, the website, all this wonderful stuff. The website is awesome. There's like this venture generator that generates little idea hooks on the fly. Fantastic stuff. One bit of new business, though, is that we will not be having the actual plays come out right after this because I have COVID and I don't have time to record nor the energy to record properly. So I want to do it justice because I love this game and I want to make sure that we're putting our best effort forward. So until I have a clear bill of health and we're able to get the crew together to record, you'll just have to wait. So sorry, folks.
If you want to support the Pot of Blunders, please consider heading to our Patreon page, patreon.com/potofblunders, all one word. We've got membership levels ranging from $1 to $10 a month, which will get you access to things like our Discord, exclusive episodes of Jumping the Street Sharks, as well as a variety of other perks. You can also support the show and help us bring more attention to amazing indie authors by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate any help you can give. We love hearing from you. You can always find us on Twitter at Pot of Blunders, and you can also reach us via email at potofblunders@gmail.com. Want more reviews, interviews, actual plays? Head to potofblunders.com and learn about even more amazing indie games. Thanks for listening. For the Pot of Blunders, I'm Nate Magnuski, and as always, may all your Ds be 12s.